in a live stream.
You know, so you put a region.
Well, so apparently nobody's worried about
And
it.
I'm like, figured it.
At one point, I
Turned on
thought that
twice.
was trying to problem with it was.
Of course, the bigger it gets, I'll fill it.
Oh, sure. Kind of the garage.
Yeah.
Will start coming to me in May. We know.
Good, how are you?
Doing what?
We still muted?
No.
Okay, all right. Welcome, everybody, to the December meeting of the Governance Committee. Appreciate you all being here. We would, of course, get ourselves warmed up with the traditional discussion of the minutes. Is there any comments or any corrections?
I'd move that we approve them, sir.
That's wonderful. Is there a second?
I will second that.
Okay, thank you. Moved and seconded. Further discussion? All right, hearing none, all in favor of approving the minutes, indicate by saying aye, please.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, the minutes pass. Okay, then that takes us to an update on enterprise risk management. John, you introduced to that, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
So the board at its September meeting adopted two policy changes. One dealt with IT security and created a body that will have some functions related to that. That group has met, adopted a minimum standard that everybody at each of the campuses is gonna have to meet. And then there's a policy establishment and some reporting after the fact that they've established that policy. The second part of that policy, that change that was made, had an enterprise risk management section to it that required the universities to adopt an enterprise risk management policy if they didn't already have one that met certain standards, also with reporting. That reporting will be new this year and it's due by January 1st. So after the November meeting at K-State, I had talked to the council of business officers about that new requirement and also reached out to the chief counsels and talked about the form of that. I think everybody is choosing to submit a written report by January 1st. I received a draft, the first draft last night of one of those reports. So those will come in and there are things that those cover according to the policy are identifying the risks that are being faced by the campuses, talking about their process and who's involved with the risk management, how it works for the various campuses. And so we'll get those reports by January 1st, and then I will distribute those to the committee members.
Okay. That's distributed for information purposes or will it be?
Just policy compliance purposes, yeah, that's what's required by the policy, and so
Okay.
we'll have those. And then, of course, if you all have feedback about what you'd like to see going forward, since these are new, there'll probably be some variance, and you might have things that you decide you want to see or don't want to see.
Be surprised otherwise, right? So, okay. Any questions? Okay, all right, and then, so that takes us to the second last planned item, so we're building a crescendo here. The Emporia State update on campus security and safety, Scotland. Welcome, thanks for being here.
Thank you, Chairman Heiss. I appreciate it. Vice Chairman Rolfe and Regent Mendoza. We haven't had a chance to meet, I don't think, before, but I'm Steve Lovett. I'm the General Counsel and Vice President of Risk Management at ESU. So it's a pleasure. Regent Benson, good morning. Good morning to you all. I appreciate this opportunity. I approach this really with kind of three reasons, I suppose. One is certainly because I've been asked to do that, so that's good.
That's a good start.
That's a great start. Want you to know that I'm compliant. I think there's utility in that. It's an iterative process year to year to take a new look at what campuses are doing from a safety and security perspective. But I also think that there's value in that because you have a chance to have a comparative analysis between different campuses. We're not all the same. One size doesn't fit all, but some of the things that we do have a lot of parallel to them. Sometimes it's repetitive. You can see best practices perhaps, or have new ideas or something. And I think there's utility in that for the system. If one of us suffers, frankly, all of us do. And certainly when it comes to safety and security, that's paramount for all of us on our campuses. And the third thing is really it's a gut check for our own campus. So when I send this out, I kind of gather data from our police and safety, from our emergency manager, Title IX operations. We look at student success and facilities. And I say, hey, answer these cold. And here's the list of questions that I've got for you. What have we been doing that's new? What's relevant? What's important? What's significant? Where are the deficiencies? Where are the gaps? Some of those you can identify fairly quickly because there's frameworks in place from a reporting standpoint, from a compliance standpoint. But sometimes it's just things that you do. What's the custom and practice on campus? And we evolve over time. So what we did 5 years ago might not be what we do today. Maybe we're doing something different today that's new, in fact, that we've never done before. Or maybe we discover that there was a practice a few years ago and we've let it fall by the wayside for a variety of reasons, and we need to re-energize that and pick up that initiative again. So I look at it holistically, and so that's how I'm approaching it this morning. I'm going to hit a few things topically. I let John know ahead of time. There's a couple of spots where we could do a deeper dive if you're interested. Those I think are sensitive enough that I would ask that we go into executive session for that. But that's entirely, of course, at your discretion as to whether or not you want to explore that and talk about that a little bit more. So questions at any time, please feel free to interrupt. My wife and daughter do all the time, even though they tell me that I do too much talking. So bully pulpit doesn't really mean much at home.
We're gonna stay away from that, so.
That's good since we are live streaming and probably recording it. So I might pay for that later. To top off or lead off my presentation, I want to say thank you. That's not just gratuitous, but I really mean it. When I talked to President Hush back in July of 2023 about bringing myself onto my current role, I said, well, you can hire me as general counsel. That would be fine. But frankly, you need centralized risk management. And for our size of campus, I think that fits nicely within the general counsel's office. He agreed. Ken's own background, he knew right away that we need to have a centralized perspective about our own risk profile. And based on my background and my business background, he thought, okay, well, we'll see what you can do. So give it some legs. So risk management really resides in my office. Enterprise risk management is one of the very first things I said we've got to have. You've got to have a centralized framework for taking a look at institutional risk and all of the different ways it affects the different business units on campus. And so we've been actively doing that since then. It was nice that the board came out with a policy that then required it because it may be shared with some of my other partners the importance of doing it instead of me just preaching about it all the time. So I want to say thank you. Frankly, it's that values-based proposition that develops that risk profile for any kind of organization. And based upon that comes safety and security issues as well. So it's all tied together, and I think that's wonderful. I hope you see that in the reports that are provided by each of the institutions here shortly. The first topic is clear reporting. Any kind of new information that might exist in our current clear report that wasn't there last year. A lot of times the reports are really fairly repetitive, of course, with content, but a couple little nuances. We've expanded our rape aggression defense systems training. That's out in the report now. We've expanded our active shooter response plans and training as well. We also ensure that the reporting criteria is met through the ENT, or emergency notification team on campus, that establishes timely warnings and emergency notification procedures that are outlined in the annual security and fire safety report.
So when you say expanded those trainings, who's required to do those?
Who's required?
Who's required to take the active shooter training, for instance?
So if you'd like, Chairman Ice, I think that's a great question. I think that would be a little bit of a deeper dive from a security standpoint.
Okay.
Security is an interesting thing because it can be preventative, but since it needs to be reactionary many times, your greatest advantage is in sometimes people not knowing. And
Fair enough.
good to know that we've got training. The right personnel, I believe, are going through those kinds of training systems and processes, but I would certainly be delighted to
No, I
share.
think that's responsive. When we say things like expand, you
Mhm.
know, it's one thing if it goes from one person to two. It's
You're
another
absolutely
that the right people are supposed to, that should be taking it are taking it.
I think you're right.
I think you're telling me the latter.
Yes,
so.
sir. Yes, sir. And I think that was the step forward, is we had, one or two folks and maybe they had some background in it. Maybe they actually had some formalized training. And we said, you know what? This needs to be part of our pipeline, and this needs to involve other folks. And it's not just LEOs that are going through that, or that I should say are applying that across campus. Those kinds of incidents, there are others like that, but those kinds of incidents, and this past week is a reminder of that. They have a lifespan of minutes, seconds. Your response to that, your reaction needs to be muscle memory. It needs to be much more layered than typically people think it is with just bulletproof vests and guns and so forth. You've got to think through everything, step 1 to step 30. And we've been working hard at doing that in a few different So.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. So that's it. As far as a Clery report, any kind of new things that somebody might come across, if they take a look at that. Security related events. This is always a part of the report to the committee that I would wish that I have nothing, and then move on to the next thing. But I will say the good thing is that the few things that we've had that have really popped up on the radar have not resulted in something catastrophic to the campus or something that we've had to deal with necessarily at an institutional level. They've been very isolated. The first of which was this past February, and I don't know, this was our year for cars running themselves into campus. I don't know, it'll be somebody else's turn this upcoming year, I suppose. But we had a car that it was outside of campus, high speed, and it was a chase. I believe at that point, the chase didn't precipitate the action. It was a knowing action by the driver of the vehicle. They came onto campus, and just because of the actual physical landscape of the campus, there was a slope upward, and then on the backside of that slope is our rec center. And they went up over the top of that, intending to do that, and went Dukes of Hazzard style in the air and went right into the building below. The wonderful thing is it was at a time when there was no one in that space. The only possible injury would have been to the driver. He ended up being relatively fine. I think some bumps, some scrapes and bruises, smashed right into the building. Had it been a time when people were occupying that space and lifting equipment, this would have been an entirely different story and a very different year. But it wasn't, and that's a wonderful thing. So significant property damage. We worked with FM Global on that. It took that rec center in that room out of service for a bit. We handled that, paid our deductible, worked with insurance, got it back online, and it is back and functioning. And we're taking a look at potential restitution through the criminal action process. I think you'll probably be facing a diversion, and then just contemplating how it is that we're good stewards of the state's funds when we had to pay our deductible and the damage to state property, and we might be talking with the family to figure that out as well. Nobody hurt, property damage. So the second occasion was on May, or in May, I should say. Again, another vehicle, and it was a distressed individual again. This person entered campus at a high rate of speed, kind of to the front of campus, to the south, and say thankfully, but they hit a tree. So that was our security bollard for us, for all intents and purposes. In fact, that developed a discussion about whether or not we should have those in high traffic areas. Every campus, I think, has exposure to traffic outside of their own campus footprint. Some of those are high risk areas for vehicular accidents. Sometimes folks are traveling a lot faster than they should be, or there's just the possibility for that happening anyway because of speed limit designated areas and so forth. So that's a discussion for our campus that we've never had before. I don't know that that will develop into something, but that level of awareness about when you've got vehicles entering campus versus just persons, pedestrians entering campus, that's an entirely different type of security risk for a number of reasons, not the least of which is when one's traveling at any kind of speed, the multiplication of tonnage that's hitting something, should they make contact, is catastrophic. So again, nobody was hurt in that, but for the driver. So we're thankful for that as well. The third incident was not vehicle related. It's a difficult one for any campus to face. It was right off of our campus. It feels like it was on campus. And in fact, it was a morning I was driving in and saw a bunch of red lights. This is in July. Emergency vehicles at about 7:15 and called our chief of police and safety, and didn't get him right away, and called our ops officer and didn't get him right away. But I said, I figured you're covered off on it. I'm probably the 10th person to know. It really had just happened, but it had just been discovered. And it was an individual, unfortunately, that took their life. There's a tunnel that goes under the interstate right adjacent to campus. We own property on the other side and property on our side, the south side and the north side as well. But it wasn't an individual, and we quickly tied off on that. It was unfortunately that real life exercise of comms. Do we have ability to identify who it was, their relations to campus, if any at all, and then how we handle post-event from a counseling perspective, student perspective, faculty perspective. And then, of course, you've got the more gruesome side of it, the forensic side of it is cleanup and access to site and that type of thing. So walking through all of that very quickly, I think it was handled extraordinarily well. A difficult situation, didn't have anything to do with campus or anybody on campus. But that was the third event. So
summer event, of course.
Yes, sure it was. Security, let's see, that was the 3 updates to existing security systems. So this is always an active process for us, as I'm sure it is with any campus. We're always taking a look at the capacity and number of our interior and exterior cameras. Who has access to those? We've been better about developing protocols for access for chain of custody purposes. And then how you use those as well. And then you've even got to take a little bit of a deeper look these days, of course, and say, when we use a software platform that has either a closed circuit element to it or not, is there any kind of AI component to that? And so looking at that as well with our IT. Card swipe access points, this is an evolving and ongoing process for our campus. There are a lot of places that are still keyed, but we certainly have buildings and offices that are card access. And so that's great in tracking and security and all types of things. That presents its own challenge from a grid standpoint, but we've navigated those fairly well. So we think there's a great advantage to that, and that's ongoing. We also continually work on reassessing sensitive areas for panic button access, high risk areas. I think my impression is that's also a moving target these days. I'm sure, like everybody else in the system and across not just this state, but everywhere, we're seeing a different student population, but also in some ways a different employee population and what their needs are and their mental health situation and conditions. How people approach difficulty and challenges and pushback might be a little bit different than it was 10 years ago or 5 years ago. We want our staff, certainly our student workers, but our staff and employees to feel safe and have access to support services that can come in and at least maybe add a little bit gravitas to the situation, to be preventative, if you will. So we've taken a hard look at that, and we have added some across campus to what we believe are sensitive areas. That would be an area, if you'd like to know a little bit more about where those are placed and why those are placed, then we can talk about it. But I would prefer that be an executive session as well. We've also changed our fire system communication process. That was traditionally through primary and secondary lines, Verizon service platform, and now all of those fire systems are on the ESU network as primary and then cellular as secondary. And that was this past summer that we did that. So that's much more streamlined and much more in control. We do internal testing, of course, rotations with Res Life. We do that through Memorial Union and a number of other buildings. And then another step that we've taken is we actually have overnight after 5 o'clock and on weekends, we actually have a Memorial Union manager who's on site. And really their primary job in those after hours is to walk the building and make sure that everything is secure. That has perhaps more public access and reason for public access at all hours than any other building on campus. And so to have a physical individual on site is kind of eyes and ears, and to be able to take care of smaller issues we think is important and a good investment. So we've taken that step as well. Let's see, we have reestablished new security. Yep, okay. So new security measures or systems, processes, and so forth. One is a reestablishment of a team that we've had previously. That's our emergency notification team. We just brought it back online robustly, training, communication. So these are the folks that make the call at any time, 24/7, whether or not we send out timely warnings or emergency notifications, not just for clery compliance issues, but really for campus notification, for campus communication, and how those push out. So we've overhauled those processes and I think made some good updates along those lines. Another thing that we have done that is fairly brand new is what we call the ETAT, and that's the Executive Threat Assessment Team. And so I had written a memo on this earlier this year, and we stood up the Executive Threat Assessment Team. I believe it was in March or April. It is a collection of, I think, 6 executives, myself being one of those. And the purpose of that team is anything that happens on campus that could manifest into some kind of institutional risk. There's always risk, cracks in the sidewalks and so forth, but anything that would affect the campus, that team is made aware of that. And that team's main role and responsibility, we kind of look at it as if you're sitting at a table with a bunch of levers, is to make sure that the actionable response elements throughout campus are activated and are in concert together and doing what they need to do. At the same time that we're actually doing boots on the ground risk assessment for whatever that might be. And that could be not just safety and security issues, that could be cultural issues, it could be all kinds of things. But centralizing that, what we've started to call, in many ways, not just with ETAT, but other areas, what I call the collective consciousness. So our executives all share that same collective consciousness about what's happening on campus, what our responses should be, what those actionable elements are for different things at different times. It allows flexibility, so it doesn't land on just one person or two persons. We can work in full concert, or we can work in parts of that team at any given time. And that's been something that's been critical, I think, this year in handling a bunch of things that have come up, and been able to mitigate those and manage those at a much earlier stage in a healthy kind of way, not just for the cultural environment on campus, but also from an operational perspective. That's been a real benefit and continues to mature as we move forward. We've implemented several recommendations from FM Global for emergency response actions. We continue with OSHA safety training, feeling that that's a good best practice guideline for a lot of our facilities folks and physical assets and property. Campus lighting guidelines the same way. We've had, because of our efforts with enterprise risk management over this past year, we also had a good year to set the groundwork for that and conduct a self-study throughout campus. And that resulted in a number of campus-wide risk forums that everyone participated in. Participation was fairly robust, from students to staff to executives. We had a couple of different surveys that went out. So one of the most wonderful benefits to doing the self-study is not to just establish that framework that an institution moves forward with ERM, but that's the first big step towards reorienting the culture across campus to a culture of safety and a culture of risk identification and mitigation. It's the buy-in that you otherwise wouldn't get if you just sat on top of the hill and pointed to people to do things. So that's been a wonderful thing as well that's been new. And then we're, of course, working forward from that with our enterprise risk management framework, and you guys will see that in our report. We've also have development and implementation of our record retention policy across campus. That's just a big clunky beast of a thing, and there's so many different things that we do like any institution. But from a security standpoint, not just in a physical sense, but that gives us a warehouse of historical record for what's going on. But then from a liability standpoint, if we're reactionary to something, we have what we need, or just as importantly, and your lawyers would know this, we don't have what we shouldn't have. And that can be just as important sometimes. So next section is any kind of tabletops or exercise training. Again, this is as a sensitive component, but it goes back to Chairman Ice's question about the rape aggression defense system training. And then we've also been much more mature with our approach from a pipeline standpoint with our active shooter response training. And I'd be happy to talk about those in executive session if you have any questions on that as well. Again, involving more than just our law enforcement personnel. On top of that, from an emergency management standpoint, we've really made an effort to involve a lot more people and a lot more training exercises to kind of build in that muscle memory for our campus. We've participated in things like hazmat tabletop exercise with local law enforcement and other kinds of emergency response elements throughout our community. That was a tabletop that I anticipated. We've got quite a few rail yards there in Emporia, of course, if we had a hazmat spill in a rail yard. And I'm sure Chairman Ice doesn't have any questions about that, but anybody else might have some serious questions about, so what does that mean? What does that affect the campus and so forth? So it was eye-opening, I think, across the board for our community at large, but also our campus, which is a wonderful resource. So reactive to how that might affect us, but then also how can we assist our community too in that type of a situation. We've done a countywide violent assailant tabletop exercise involving multiple agencies that tested all of our systems and our responses to something like that, both on campus, but also not just in the moment, but the aftermath, which can be just as critical and just as devastating in many ways. So we did that active shooter training, NIMS overview. We've also participated in sport and special event risk management training and brought in key personnel for that to plan and assess risks and implement safety measures for campus events, not just sporting, but those larger events that have a little bit more vulnerability. Storm spotter training, and then National Weather Service training as well. So taking a more serious look and a more holistic look at how it is that we're prepared for different types of events, not just on campus, but the community that we're connected with, and how we relay between those different response elements throughout our community. Res Life, of course, conducts formal trainings for their staff as well as the rec center and our student wellness conduct. Ongoing trainings occur throughout the year. We provide at least 4 fire drills per semester for Res Life. And then the Life Pro staff engage in ongoing training on that. We've also started a walkthrough with all of our res halls with our maintenance and custodial and pro staff workers. That accomplishes a few different things: familiarity with the footprint itself, knowing ingress and egress, but also shutoffs where supplies are located, materials are located. A lot of times your best chance for that response is the first response, and it's boots on the ground for people that are involved in those spaces. And so their awareness level and their comfort level, therefore, so their own personal safety comfort is heightened by doing that. And then, of course, we test all of our building fire systems on scheduled rotation. As far as training goes from a Title IX standpoint, we've done quite a bit of that this past year, 3 significant ones that are titled You Got This, Binge Thinking, and Report Equals Support. That's a collaboration with Catharsis Productions. 2 of those were online for new students. So make sure everybody that comes onto campus as a new Hornet goes through those trainings. The You Got This focuses on bystander intervention. And then we've got Binge Thinking, which is tools to foster healthy relationships. And then also their understanding of alcohol use and abuse, and that's for all new students. And then we also have a 3rd training session for all employees, and that's the Report Equals Support. That emphasizes responsibility for mandatory reporting for Title IX, but then there are other components, and it's a whole flow sheet, if you will, flow chart on what are all the other types of reporting requirements that any one of our staff members might have because of their position or their interaction with campus components. We've done specific training for international students, explaining the importance of Title IX and the relevance to them. That has different kinds of nuances typically than you might find with our domestic student population. Specific training for new student athletes along those lines with Title IX in relation to athletics. Specialized training for employees involved in the Title IX process. This was a day-long training and involved 25 to 30 folks. And all different levels, whether or not they participate in the process actively or whether there would be reporters within that process. And then, of course, Res Life professional staff training for Title IX. Encouraging and facilitating communications with students, faculty, and administration is the next topic. I think one of our great benefits is we're a talkative campus. We're smaller, of course, in some ways being a regional institution. So we just personally know more people. And we definitely have, over the past 3 years, developed a better culture about more constructive communications and conversations about all different kinds of things. So I think that's the most significant weapon or tool resource, maybe weapon's the wrong word to use, tool resource that a campus has is its disposal for purpose of communication. But we've also done more formalized things. We participate and join as partners in the See Something, Say Something campaign with our local law enforcement resources throughout the community. We have our crisis intervention team programs, partnership with SOS Incorporated, and our response team and sexual assault response team as well. Again, I think ETAT has been a good centralized way of pushing down communication to actionable elements at different times when we identify a risk at the institutional level. We also provide supporting student mental health toolkits to our faculty, staff, for our students. Along with that, we've got EAB Navigate, Behavioral Intervention Team, which has been longstanding, but I think has some improved processes. And then output reports so we can have a better assessment of that particular profile. We do this with our care teams too. This is new this last year, where I said, hey, I'd like to see at the least quarterly reports, if not monthly, just from an activity standpoint. And you kind of measure the pulse of campus from your student population as well as then your staff population. And then, of course, through our counseling center, we've got a comprehensive prevention education program that we provide for suicide prevention, mental health awareness, and so on. New students are required to complete an alcohol safety skills training. We have new students that are required to complete their Title IX, sexual assault prevention, healthy relationship training, et cetera. And then we've have a strong commitment, I think, like all campuses, to our student mental health and their support. We do that through TELUS Health, which is a 24/7 accessibility that's an online, completely privatized. So we also have we stood up, I think, a little bit over a year ago. So this is our first year in use, our 1-800 hotline. And that's not just via telephone, but you can email and you can get on the website and all that kind of stuff. We've had a handful of reports, so that's good. It can be entirely anonymous if an individual wants to, or they can actually disclose who they are. That hits myself, my office. It also hits our internal audit, who's administratively under my office. It can also hit human resources, and it depends on, and you can categorize that, what that particular report is, so that we can take care of that either internally, or if we need to do something more active, we can do that as well. So that's a great communication channel too, and we continue to make our campus aware of that type of resource, that communication resource. Fire safety for students and so forth. Of course, we have our annual security and fire safety report. I've mentioned the drills that Res Life provides for our students. We also, of course, are in compliance with all of our local code requirements when it comes to fire drills throughout campus and all of our buildings and facilities, and our students participate in those as well. So the last topic really was our Title IX, and it was just, what does our process look like? I thought, you can tailor it to some extent. To some extent, everybody's looks the same, no matter whose it is. It can be kind of confusing whether it's informal or formal. I'll tell you this, I think we just had our first for this year, so we didn't quite get out of this year without it, but our very first request for a formal process or I'm going to say reconciliation through the Title IX framework. I don't know what will come of that. That looked a little bit shaky according to our Title IX coordinator, so I don't know if that will stick all the way through. But that's our first one, which is wonderful. I think it's not, I don't think, a reflection based upon our other metrics that we take a look at, that people aren't aware of that resource. But I think it's the efficacy of the informal process and our response. So many times, even if we don't think that, oh, that doesn't sound like a Title IX thing at all, our Title IX coordinator steps into that space and still offers the resources, because it's still a resource platform. And so even if somebody's not wanting to walk through the process and it doesn't involve anything that would fall within the Title IX framework, there's still resources that are provided through that framework. So what I did, and if you want to pass them around, you may, but it's just two simple flow charts for formal resolution process and informal resolution process that y'all can take a look at. If you got questions about that, then please do ask me. Thankfully for our campus, it's not something that's occurs very often. So we're in pretty good shape when it comes to that. We had an agreement with OCR from several years ago. We worked on that this past year. That had frankly just kind of hit a pause button with OCR and with us. I guess they're waiting till I stepped into my spot to kick it off again. But that resulted in a really good policy scrub and overhaul, as well as a process scrub and overhaul. So we're really in good shape. I think that's all I have topically, and certainly if you have questions or want a deeper dive on something.
Any questions? I don't think I need to see a need for executive session, but does anybody else? Okay, all right. So, I mean, we understand the sensitivity of some things. So,
Sure.
thank you very much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I'm
Appreciate what you
delighted
do.
that you guys take the time to do this. I think it's significant for the system at large.
Well, it's important. So
It is.
one spends time on places that people should recognize are important.
That's right.
Thank you.
You bet, John.
So any other business for the committee? All right, we are adjourned. How did we do on the responses to the?